The auctioneer's hammer had begun to lift when the voice came from the back of the room. "Sir." Every head turned. A woman in a gray pelisse sat near the last row, with her gloved hands folded in her lap. She was perhaps 30, brown hair pinned close. No jewels, no companion. Nothing about her that announced itself except the voice, which was clear and northern, and carried to every corner without effort. She named a figure 200 pounds above the Duke's last bid. The room went still. At the front, the Duke of Thornfield turned his head. He was tall, dark-coated, with a silvering at the temples that looked less like worry, and more like something he had chosen. His eyes were the gray of weather, coming in off open ground. He looked at her, the way a man looks at a chair that is moved in the dark, not with anger, with the particular attention a person gives, a thing that has appeared where no thing ought to be. "Madam," he said, not loudly, but the room was quiet enough to carry it halfway to the street. "That is a great deal of money for a lady to risk on a house she has never seen. Allow me to spare you the trouble. The place carries burdens you cannot know. It is not a thing for you." He said it the way a man corrects a clerk, flat, final. Then someone at his elbow ventured a word. The Duke answered over his shoulder without turning. "I did not ask your opinion." Whether he meant the man or meant her, she was never afterward sure. It did not matter. The whole room took it for her. Half of them smiled. Penelope Ashford felt the old flat heat move through her chest. She had felt it 100 times before, standing in gentlemen's rooms as her father's daughter. She did not let it reach her face. She rose. She dropped the Duke a curtsy. It was a good one. Unhurried, exactly correct. The curtsy of a woman, taught by expensive people who had forgotten none of it. Rising out of it, she looked at the auctioneer, and not at the Duke at all. "Another 100, she said. "If you have ever watched two people fight without raising their voices, stay with this story. Because what followed in that long room off the Strand was not an auction, it was a duel." The Duke lifted one finger. Another 200. She matched it. He raised again. She matched him, with the flat certainty of a woman who had done the sum in the carriage on the way. She knew to a shilling what Ravensworth and its 12 poor persons were worth to her. It was more than they were worth to any man who already owned a dozen other houses. The murmur died. The agents sat forward in their chairs. The room smelled of money, and of something older than money. He stopped at last. Not because he could not go on. Everyone in that room understood that. He stopped because a duke does not brawl in an auction house with a woman in a gray pelisse. Not over 200 pounds. Not over the shelter of a dozen old people. He stopped because going on had begun to look like the thing that would be talked of. The stopping, at least, he could make look like contempt. He turned and walked out before the hammer fell, so that it should not be said he had lost. The hammer fell. "Sold," said the auctioneer, with something close to relief. "To Ashford," she said. "Miss Penelope Ashford." Her man of business found her in the passage. Hollis was pale with a satisfaction he could not quite approve. He was square and gray and careful, and he had served her father for 30 years, and wept without shame at the graveside. "You have done it," he said. "God help us both. Do you understand what you have done?" "I have bought a house," she said. "You have bought a war." Hollis wiped his forehead. "Did you hear the clause? 60 years those two trusts have been at each other's throats. You are not the owner of an almshouse, Miss Ashford. You are one half of a lock that will not turn, and the other half of it just walked out of that room hating you." Penelope drew her gloves through her fingers. Her hands, she was pleased to find, were steady. "The other half of the lock," she said, "is exactly why I came." Hollis looked at her a long moment. He had known her since she was a child, drawing under a table. "Your father would have told you to sell it to the Duke at a profit, before the ink dried. Take the money north. Sleep." "My father," said Penelope, was turned out of a room in this city when I was 9 years old. 3 gentlemen did it. They called him a tradesman to his face, while I stood holding his coat. He never forgot it. Neither did I. She pulled her gloves on. There are 12 old people in Derbyshire who were told this month that the great man means to be rid of them. They sent a man to me on foot because they had no one else in the world with money and no lord over them. I am not going to sleep, Mr. Hollis. I am going to Derbyshire. At Thornfield Hall, up in the North Country, the Duke came home in a black and settled temper. His grandmother heard the whole of it before he had his boots off. Sophronia, Dowager Duchess of Thornfield, was 81. She had buried a husband, a son, and most of her illusions. She sat upright by the fire with a shawl she did not need, and a stick she did, and she watched her grandson walk the length of the room and back. "So a woman outbid you," she said, "for Ravensworth, in front of the whole of the trade." "A person named Ashford," he said. "Iron money, new money, no notion of what the place carries. She has bought St. Cuthbert's out from under me, for the pleasure of spiting a man she never met. Or," said the Dowager, "she has bought it because somebody frightened 12 old people, and they had nowhere else to turn." He stopped walking. "You take her part. You have not met her." "Neither had you," said Sophronia, "when you told her in a public room that you did not ask her opinion." She let that sit in the air between them. "I know you, Robert. I know why you wanted Ravensworth, and it was not greed, and it was not spite. You wanted the 2 halves of that trust in one honest hand at last. You wanted those old people warm before they die. You wanted to set down a thing your grandfather could not carry." She tapped her stick once on the floor. "But you have wanted it so long, you have forgotten it is not only yours to want." He set his hand on the mantel. His jaw was tight. The almshouse was the oldest grief in his family, and the oldest shame. His grandfather and old Mr. Aldworth of Ravensworth had built St. Cuthbert's together 60 years ago, when the 2 houses were real friends, the kind that dine unannounced. They had endowed it between them, pound for pound, a fund to keep 12 poor persons to the end of their days. And then the fund had vanished, gone in a single bad year, out of the strongbox that held it. Each house had sworn the other had drawn it out. The friendship had died in a night. 60 years of lawyers had grown up in its place. The 12 poor persons had been kept thinly on grudging annual sums. No one had agreed to mend so much as a slate. His grandfather had gone to his grave certain the Aldworths had robbed him. His father had drunk on the grievance, and taught it to his son like a catechism. And Robert had learned it. Then, at 19, going through the old muniment room, he had found a thing he had told no one, a ledger in a steward's hand, a page in it that did not say what a Thornfield was supposed to believe. He had shut the book. He had told himself it proved nothing. He had let his grandfather lie quiet. "The Aldworths are gone," he said to the window. "The last of them is in the ground, and his debts sold his house. There is no one left to make peace with, only a stranger who wanted to win." "Then you had better learn what she wants," said his grandmother, "since the law has tied your hand to hers for the rest of your life. You cannot admit a soul without her. She cannot mend a slate without you." She rapped her stick once more. "I should think, if you were both very stubborn, you could manage between you to let those 12 freeze, while you nurse your dignity. Do not, Robert. I am too old to watch it happen twice." The fire cracked. The Dowager's eyes held her grandson's across the room. He did not answer. Outside, the October wind moved through the bare trees of Thornfield Park, carrying the first cold edge of the season down from the hills toward a village called Nethergate, where 9 old people sat in rooms with water coming through the ceiling and waited for someone to come. Someone was coming. She was on the North Road already, with a printed auction bill soft at the corners in her pocket. and a sum in her head that Hollis would have wept over, and she was not going to sleep. Ravensworth, when Penelope came to it at the end of a wet October, was smaller and sadder than the auction bill had promised. St. Cuthbert's was worse. The almshouse stood below the manor, at the edge of Nethergate village, a long, low range of grey stone, under a roof that had lost its war with the weather years before. 6 of its 12 dwellings had water coming through. The chapel end had a crack wide enough to fit a hand into. The garden that was meant to feed them had gone to dock and nettle, and the 12 poor persons were 9 now. 3 places stood empty, unfilled for years, because filling them required 2 signatures that had never come together. The 9 stood out in the drizzle to meet her. Word had run ahead that the lady who had beaten the Duke was coming. They did not know whether she was a rescue or another kind of weather. An old man came forward. She knew him. It was the man who had walked 11 miles. "Simeon Holgate, ma'am," he said, pulling off a cap that let the rain into his white hair. "I am the oldest here. I served up at the manor once, when I was a lad. I served at Thornfield after, when the old Duke wanted a spare pair of hands. I have been on both sides of this quarrel my whole life, ma'am, and I never yet saw a slate mended for it." His voice shook, not with cold. "We heard you paid a great deal of money. We cannot think why." "Because you sent for me, Mr. Holgate," she said. "Because no one else would come." Behind him, a woman held a small girl by the hand. The child was perhaps 6, thin, with a solemn face, and a wooden peg doll clutched against her chest. The woman bobbed. "Widow Comber, my lady, and this is our Peggy. My grandchild. Her mother is gone, poor lamb, and there is nowhere else for her." She said it like a warning, in case the new owner meant to count heads and find one too many. Penelope crouched down, careless of the mud on her hem, and looked the child in the face. "That is a fine doll," she said. "Does she have a name?" "Cuthbert," the child whispered. "Like the saint. He looks after us." "Then he has been overworked," said Penelope, "and I have come to help him." She was rewarded with the ghost of a smile. Something in her chest that she had held braced since London came a little loose. She stood. She looked at the roof, the crack, the empty dwellings, the 9 faces. "I will tell you plainly," she said, "because I was raised to plain dealing. I own the land you stand on. I do not, by myself, owe you a single slate. The charity that keeps you is tied by law. Between me and the Duke of Thornfield, neither of us can mend a thing alone. I have met the Duke exactly once. He does not like me." A dry sound moved through them. Even in their fear, they knew that country. "But I did not buy this ground to leave you standing in a quarrel, 60 years older than I am. I will get you a roof before winter. I do not yet know how. I know only that I will." Simeon Holgate looked at her with his watery eyes. "He will not sign, ma'am," he said, almost gently. "The way a person warns a child about a hot grate, begging your pardon. He never signs, nor did his father. The pen never yet came down on the same paper from both hands. That is the whole of the story of this place." "Then," said Penelope, "we had better make a new story." The first meeting of the 2 trustees of St. Cuthbert's took place 11 days later. She held it in the estate office at Ravensworth, on ground that was hers. She had chosen it on purpose. He had accepted it for reasons she could not read. He came exactly on the hour. He was announced, which in her own house struck her as absurd, and she let it pass. He wore dark clothes. He bowed with a correctness so complete it was a kind of insult. She curtsied with one to match. They understood each other perfectly. They liked each other not at all. Between them on the table lay the deed of foundation, borrowed from the parish chest. Beside it lay the almshouse accounts, and a great sheet on which she had drawn in a clear hand exactly what 9 old people needed, and exactly what it would cost. "I have looked at the accounts, Your Grace," she said, when the servant had gone out and left the door open as propriety required. They are kept by the warden, Mrs. Stroud. I understand your house appointed her. They are, to use the kind word, untidy. Money goes out for repairs I can find no sign of in the building itself. A roof paid for 3 times over, and the rain still coming through. She set a finger on a line. Before we quarrel about the future, I should like to understand the past. She had expected him to defend his warden or his house. He did neither. He looked at the line under her finger for a long moment. I have never seen these books, he said. You are a trustee of 30 years standing, she said before she could stop herself. And you have never seen the books? My father was the trustee, and his father before him. The signatures required were theirs, then mine. The management was left to the warden. To manage it jointly would have required the 2 houses to sit in one room, which they would not do. He raised his eyes. You find that shameful? So, madam, do I. But do not mistake it for a thing I chose. I inherited a lock, the same as you have just bought one. It was not what she had braced for. She had come armed against a bully. She found herself across a table from a man as tired of the thing as she was, who had merely borne it longer. The discovery unsettled her more than rudeness would have done. They worked for 2 hours. It was not friendly. Twice they came near open war. Once over whether the empty dwellings should be filled before the roof was sound. He held it madness, to bring more souls under a failing roof. She held it monstrous, to keep 3 shelters empty in winter for a point of order. Each thought the other's position not merely wrong, but morally wrong. Each said so in the cold, full sentences of people who fight fair. Neither moved. And here, though it cost her to admit it, she saw he had the better of it. A dwelling with a rotten roof was not a shelter. It was a trap with a door. To fill it now was to give an old body a place to be killed in comfort by the first hard frost. You are right, she said at last. The words came out flat and unwilling, and she made herself say them, because she had been raised not to lie to a ledger or to a man. The roof first, I concede it. But the day the roof is sound, your grace, those 3 doors open, and I will hear no further argument about points of order. Something moved in his face. He had not expected the concession, and it plainly cost him to see it made honestly, at cost, across a table. Agreed, he said. The roof first, then the doors. At the end, he took up the pen. She had drawn an order for the whole roof at once, at a cost that had made Hollis go white. She slid it across the table with no great hope. He read it to the bottom. Then he did a thing that undid quietly 1 plank of what she had believed about him. He signed it. The roof, at least, we need not quarrel about, he said. Children could agree on the roof. He set the pen down. I will meet the half of it from my own purse, not the trust, so that it may be done before Christmas, and not wait on the trust's slow money. You need not tell them so. It does not concern them where the slates come from, only that they are dry. She looked at the signature, his and hers on one paper. The first time in 60 years, the pen had come down from both hands. She found she did not know what to say, which was rare for her. Why? She said at last. He was already pulling on his gloves. Because you were right about the roof, he said, and I would rather be right with you than wrong against you. That is all the peace I have to offer today, Miss Ashford. Do not build a cathedral on it. He bowed. He went. She sat a long while with the paper in front of her, and the rain, for once, not coming in on anyone. The roof was on by the 2nd week of December. The mending of it worked a change in Nethergate that ran ahead of the slates. Men who had watched St. Cuthbert's rot for a lifetime came to lay stone. The lady from the north paid a fair wage on a Friday. The Duke's own men came down from Thornfield to help, and nobody was told to stop. Penelope, who had meant to stay a fortnight, took rooms at the manor and stayed. A thing half-built is worse than none, and she had never in her life left a thing half-built. In those short December days, there was a great deal of plain work, and she found she saw him better in it than across a table. He came down to the range more than a duke had any need to. He knew stone, which surprised her. He could tell a good slate from a cheap one at a glance, and he did it not to lord it over the men, but because he plainly could not help himself. A slater put his boot through a rotten batten one raw morning, and swore. The Duke, who was steadying the ladder below, laughed. It was a short, startled sound, as though laughter were a language he had half forgotten. She caught him at it. He stopped and reached for his gravity again, looking almost caught out. She said nothing. She had learned that the surest way to lose a thing newly seen in a guarded man is to name it aloud. It was a raw afternoon, just before Christmas, when she came round the end of the almshouse range with an armful of blankets and stopped. The Duke of Thornfield was on his knees in the mud. Little Peggy Comber's peg doll had gone down the old dry well shaft. The child was crying the particular hopeless cry of a poor child who knows that nothing lost is ever coming back. And the Duke, who could have sent a servant, who could have promised a finer doll from a shop in town, had taken off his coat and laid himself full length in the dirt, with his arm down the shaft, swearing very softly, in a way he plainly thought no one could hear. He got it. He came up filthy, the doll in his fist, and gave it to the child with a gravity that treated the matter as exactly as important as it was. "There," he said. "He has had an adventure. He will want it kept quiet. Saints do not like a fuss." Peggy took the doll and looked up at the enormous muddy man. "They say you are wicked," she said, with the terrible honesty of the very young. "Do they?" said the Duke. "But you are not," said Peggy, deciding it on the spot. "You are just sad." He was silent a moment. "That is a great deal cleverer than most things I hear in a year," he said. He stood and saw Penelope at the corner with her blankets, and the whole color of him changed. The drawbridge going up. The Duke coming back into the man. "Miss Ashford," he said stiffly, reaching for his coat and his dignity together. "Your Grace," she said. She did not smile at him. She had the wit not to. But something had shifted in her, and it must have shown, because he grew stiffer still, the way a man does who has been seen doing a kindness and cannot bear the witness. The child dropped her doll. "It does not signify." "No," Penelope agreed gently. "It does not signify at all." She went in with her blankets and let him keep the small dignity of pretending. All that evening, she thought of a duke lying in the mud for a pauper's doll. She could not make it fit the man in the auction room off the Strand. So she stopped trying. She held the two of them side by side and let the ground shift under her, and did not fight it. Outside, the first heavy snow of December began to fall on Nethergate, on the new slates and the old stone and the 12 chimneys, 9 of which were lit. On the manor, where a woman sat late, by a single candle, reading old account books with new eyes, and on the road between Ravensworth and Thornfield, 3 miles of dark ground that was getting shorter by the day, though neither of them had said so yet. Part 3. The great crisis of that winter came on the night of the January storm. The wind came up out of the northeast after dark and drove sleet before it. Somewhere past midnight, the chimney at the chapel end caught fire in its own soot. The crack had never been mended. The flue had never been swept, because the warden's paper repairs had never touched real stone. The soot went up in a roar and set the roof timbers of 3 dwellings, smoldering above the old people asleep beneath them. It was Peggy who woke and smelled it. It was Peggy who ran, a small figure in a nightgown through the sleet, not to her grandmother, but up the hill to the manor, by an instinct no one could ever explain. Penelope was dressed and out of the door before the child had finished speaking. She sent the manor's men down at a run. She sent a rider to Thornfield, though Thornfield was 3 miles off, and she did not truly expect him. She went down herself, into the smoke. He came. That was the thing she kept afterward. The rider had not been gone 20 minutes when the Duke of Thornfield came down the Nethergate Road at a gallop in his shirt, his coat flung on unbuttoned, riding through a January storm because a pauper's almshouse was burning, and there was no one in the county to see him do it and be impressed. They did not discuss it. There was no time and no need, and that was the whole mercy of it. For 2 hours, they worked side by side in the smoke, like two hands of one body. Not once did either give the other an order, because none was wanted. She knew the old people, which door was which, who could walk and who must be carried. He was tall and strong and unafraid of a roof that might come down. He went in for old Simeon, when the smoke was at its worst, and brought him out over his shoulder. Then he went back for the blankets and for the parish chest with the deed in it, because Penelope called to him that the deed must not burn, and he understood at once, in the middle of a fire, exactly why it mattered. Half of Nethergate came out into the storm, roused by the bell and the running child. The Duke's men passed water hand to hand from the well, the manor's men beside them, the villagers beside both. No one asked whose man his neighbor was. They saved every soul. They saved the deed. The 3 dwellings at the chapel end were lost, their roofs falling in a gush of sparks that the sleet put out almost gently. But the 3 who had slept beneath them stood shaking in the manor kitchen, an hour later, with hot milk in their hands, and their lives still in their bodies. In the gray, burnt dawn, the Duke and Penelope stood in the ruined doorway and looked at the wet black beams. There were repairs paid for this flue, he said. His voice was stripped to nothing by smoke and the long night. I signed the annual sums myself, every year. He turned his head slowly and looked at her. Where did the money go, Miss Ashford? Where it has gone for 60 years, I think, she said. Into the same hand. I have been reading the old books. I did not want to speak until I was sure. A case half built is worse than none. She held his gaze. I am nearly sure now. He was silent, staring at the wet char where 3 old people had nearly died on his signature. Build it, he said. Whatever it is, I will not shield it, even if it is my own house's shame. I have shielded a thing once, out of loyalty to a dead man. I have thought of it every day for 13 years. He said it low, to the burnt beams, not to her, but she was the only one who heard. Build the case, then bring it to me first, not to the county, to me. We will take a very short break. If you do not want to miss new stories, please subscribe to the channel. It was 2 days after the fire, in the manor over the account books, that each of them let the other see the wound. His came first, because the fire had opened it. I was 19, he said. He was standing at the window, not looking at her. I was in the muniment room at Thornfield, going through the old steward's books. I found the accounts of St. Cuthbert's from the year the fund was lost. He drew a breath. The strongbox was in the keeping of our own steward that year, a man named Stroud. He heard her breath change, and did not turn. Yes, he said, the warden's grandfather, and the entries in his hand for that year did not reconcile. Money in, money not out, to any place I could name. He was quiet. I was 19, Miss Ashford. I had been raised to hate the Aldworths as the first duty of a Thornfield, and I held in my hand a thing that said perhaps the fault was ours, kept by our own servant, with my grandfather 3 years dead, and unable to answer it. His hand closed on the windowsill. I shut the book. I told myself it proved nothing. I let him lie quiet. I have let him lie quiet for 13 years, and let a whole county go on believing a lie, because the truth shamed my house, and no living Aldworth was left to be cleared by it. He turned his head. That is the man you think kind, because he fished a doll out of a well. She let the silence hold him a moment. You were 19, and grieving, and loyal, she said. It is not a small sin to protect a grave at the cost of the truth. But it is not a monster's sin either. It is a boy's. And you have just told me to build the case that will unmake your grandfather's name in open county. A monster does not do that. She closed the book softly. You have carried it 13 years. Set it down. I will help you carry the rest. He turned then and looked at her. Something in his gray eyes was undefended in a way she had not seen and would not see again for a long time. Hers he earned 3 days later, and it cost her as much to show. Old Simeon Holgate died in the night, not from the fire, though the fire had not helped, from 80-odd winters and one too many. He went in his own dry bed with the roof sound above him. Penelope was there at the end. She sat with him through the small hours, holding a hand that had gone light as a leaf. He was easy and clear in his mind, which is not always given to the very old. He asked whether the 3 empty dwellings would be filled, and she told him yes before winter was out, and he nodded as though a long account had finally been squared. Then he asked after Peggy, and after the doll called Cuthbert, and smiled at the answer she gave him, and did not speak again. She came out dry-eyed and steady. She gave the orders that had to be given. It was only afterward, when the orders were done, that she stood in the cold passage and could not make herself go on. The Duke found her there, with her hand flat against the stone wall, holding herself up by it. He walked 11 miles, she said. She did not look at him. In the autumn, to reach a stranger, because he had heard she had money and no lord over her, and the old people were frightened. 11 miles, at 80 years old, on a rumor that I might be kind. Her voice did a thing she never let it do. My father died among people who called him trade to his face. I swore no helpless person should ever be turned out while I had the means to stop it, and I have just watched the first one I saved die in a dry bed, and I do not know if it was worth £2,000, and I cannot ask him. The Duke did not touch her. The rules did not allow it, and the rules were all they had. But he stood close, closer than business. It was worth it, he said quietly. He died warm and known and grieved, in a bed that did not leak, having been heard by the one person in England who would come. There is no sum on earth that buys a man that. You gave it to him. Do not stand in a cold passage and doubt it. She wiped her eyes with the back of her wrist, once, and got her face back. Thank you, Your Grace, she said. Robert, he said. I think, after tonight, and the fire, and a great deal else, I think you may call me Robert, when there is no one to be scandalized by it. She looked at him. Then you must call me Penelope, she said. It seems only fair, and this house was always great on fairness. She built the case through the black weeks of February. At night, by one candle, she built it the way her father had taught her to build anything worth building. From the outside in, so that no man could pull one stone and bring the whole thing down. She rode to the timber yard at Malbrook and to the slater, the mason, the coal merchant. She asked them plainly to show her their books. What had they truly been paid? In what year? For what work at St. Cuthbert's? She set what they had truly been paid, beside what the warden's accounts said had been paid. The gap between the 2 columns was the shape of a theft 60 years long, and she found inside the parish chest a letter from old Mr. Aldworth to the 3rd Duke, sealed and never sent, written in a dead man's stiff grief. Thornfield, it said. I did not draw a penny of it, on my soul and my children's. If you did not either, then we are 2 honest men, robbed by a 3rd, and we are fools to let him watch us tear each other's houses down. She brought it all to Robert first, as she had promised. She laid it on the table between them. The old theft and the new one, in one long chain. The grandfather and the granddaughter. The 60 years. He read it in silence. He read the tradesman's true figures, against the warden's false ones. He read the old steward's crooked page, from 60 years before. And he read old Aldworth's letter last, the sealed grief that had never been sent. When he looked up, his face was white. "My grandfather did not rob the fund," he said slowly, the way a man says a thing he has waited his whole life to be allowed to say. Nor did Aldworth. A Stroud robbed them both. Let them hate each other over his head. His granddaughter has been doing the same to you and to me for 18 years. He set the letter down very gently. "You have cleared my grandfather, and Aldworth, whom my house taught me to hate, in the same breath." He passed a hand across his face. "You have unmade 60 years in a fortnight, with a candle and a habit of reading other men's books. And you told me to build it," she said, "knowing what it might cost your name. That is not nothing, Robert." The corner of his mouth moved. The corner of hers answered it. It was the nearest either of them had come to warmth in all that cold winter. The old quarrel ended at the Malbrook Assembly, in the most public room in the county, so that everyone who had fed on it might see it fed no more. The Duke of Thornfield crossed the whole length of the floor to where Miss Penelope Ashford stood, in gray silk that was not plain at all. He bowed to her, a real bow, from a man to a woman he honored, and he spoke clearly, meaning it to be heard. "Miss Ashford has proved from the parish's own books a thing this county has had wrong for 60 years. The fund of St. Cuthbert's was not taken by the Aldworths, as my grandfather believed, nor by my house as theirs believed. It was taken by a servant, trusted by both. Two honest families were set against each other over a thief's head for 3 generations. I have been part of that hatred. I am done with it." The room did not breathe. Then Penelope did her part. She could have kept the almshouse under her single hand forever. She had won. No one could have made her share the victory. She gave it back. "I have this day deeded the almshouse and its whole endowment into a new trust," she said in her clear northern voice, equal between Ravensworth and Thornfield, governed by 2 honest hands together, never again by one alone. She looked at Robert. His grandfather and old Mr. Aldworth built that house together when they were friends. It was only ever meant for 2 hands. I should like to see it have them again. The Duke of Thornfield led out Miss Penelope Ashford to the top of the set, in front of everyone who had come to watch a war. There was no war left to watch, and the disappointment of it was the sweetest thing many of them had felt in years. "You have given away a victory that was wholly yours," he said, as the figure of the dance brought them together. "I do not think 1 person in 100 would have done it. Some things you can only keep by handing them to someone you trust," she said. "Yes, I trust you. It is the most expensive thing I have ever admitted to a man in my life. Do not make me regret the outlay." "I asked your opinion," he said at last. "You did," she said. "60 years late, and about a great many things. You may keep asking. I have a great deal of it, and I have never once been shy of giving it." That June evening, they walked the meadow between the manor and the almshouse in the long gold light, with Peggy running ahead to show the peg doll called Cuthbert the new cabbages. They stopped at the low wall above St. Cuthbert's and looked down at smoke rising honest from 12 chimneys, the full number, for the first time in living memory. Over the rebuilt chapel door, a mason had cut 2 clasped hands and 2 dates. The old founding, when 2 friends built it. The second founding, when 2 strangers made it whole. "I have been thinking," Robert said, "of the first thing I ever said to you." "You said it was not a thing for me," said Penelope, "and that you did not ask my opinion." He was quiet a moment, watching the child, the chimneys, the woman beside him. "I have spent a year learning to ask it. I find I do not want to stop. I should like to know what you think about all of it, for the rest of my life." She leaned against the wall in the last of the sun, the woman who had come north on a rumor that she might be kind, seen at last, not as trade, not as an interloper, not as a gray shadow at the back of a room, but as exactly what she was. "I think," she said, "that we fill a 13th place. Deeds can be recut. We have proved that. She watched the smoke go up straight in the still evening. And I think you had better ask me again tomorrow, and the day after, because I mean to hold you to every word of it. Below them in the yard, Peggy held the peg doll up to a cabbage and explained its several virtues in a low and serious voice. The evening smelled of cut grass and coal smoke, and the cold heather off the moors beyond the hills. Neither of them spoke for a while. They had reached the kind of silence that is not a wall between two people, but a room in which they may both sit. The two clasped hands over the door caught the last of the light,